It's good to see everyone here this evening. If you open your Bibles, please, to Leviticus. We're in the 21st and 22nd chapters of Leviticus. Lesson 10, we have 12 lessons, so we're coming to the end. I hope that those of you who've been in the class, when you read over phrases, I hope they're phrases that mean something to you now, maybe they didn't before, that you can pick up exactly what type of sacrifice is being offered. What does the bread of God mean? Well, what was that about? The different, I talk about the sacrifices, the type of sacrifices that are be offered, and that's what we're going to be emphasizing in these two chapters. They're not a redundant thing. You'll find in the second part, apparently there were questions that were being asked. What about a dwarf? Can he serve as the one who is a priest? What about leprosy? What about do we mourn for the next of kin? Would that include my wife? Next of kin? No. But yet we see from the whole scriptures, from Ezekiel, that as a priest, that sometimes the next of kin might be your niece, might be your granddaughter, might be your grandmother. It's people who are close to the family is how that term is applied by God. And so we say next of kin. A wife is not next of kin. She's the closest to you, and that's kind of what it meant in the Hebrew. So things like that, I know, going through here, I pick up on things that I might just pass over. I said, why does he say it that way? And it's because we have been grounded in the terms, and we've gone over them and through them as we've gone verse by verse. And I hope some of that comes out to you as it has blessed me with the study this particular time. Through Leviticus. Leviticus is the part of what 5 books that we call in the Hebrew Bible. The Pentateuch. There's the idea of 5. Genesis, Exodus, and now we're in Leviticus. And these are things that are brought forth, and we'll see it in the last lesson. We've seen it from the very beginning. It seemed like we've been here for 40 years, but it hasn't been that long. They have received the law, and they're receiving it from Mount Sinai. It's before they have left there that we see these laws being set forth. So we got into this last time, and this is the point that the quality of sacrifice is illustrated. It's does the priest have blemish? Does he have a physical blemish? We want the best to be offered to God. The sacrifices have to be without blemish. But here's the point about the priest that is offering that sacrifice had to not have too many members of their body, 6 fingers, 24 appendages, you got hands and feet. You had a giant that had 24, had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, and he was put to death by Jonathan in the Bible. It wasn't because he had toes, it's because he had more than what is usually the case. A dwarf was not someone that might be short, but very extremely thin and wasting away. That's kind of what that Hebrew term meant. So we see the quality of service that is being offered. Something that is emphasized in these first few verses, that is distinction from the priest who served and was of Aaron's lineage, but not the high priest. And so that's what we got in last time. And I think there was I saw some blank faces. We didn't get to go into that. But we asked the question, could a priest and a serving high priest go into the tent of a dead immediate family member? So I made a distinction there. And when we read our text, let's do that together so we won't have a problem with this. But that's kind of a tricky question. Didn't mean it to be tricky, but it meant to be thorough in our study and to really make sure we understand a difference. Look at Leviticus 21 and verse 1. Who is he speaking to? Speak unto the priest of the sons of Aaron. But it's not the high priest here, because we have a distinction that's going to be made. He says, say unto them, there shall none defile himself for the dead among his people, except for his what? for his kin, those very close to him. That is near to him. That's kind of what the word meant. And he says, for his mother and father, his son, his daughter, his brother, and for his sister. And she needs to be a virgin that is near to him, that hath what? She's a virgin. She has what? No husband. For her may he defile himself. That means I'm not doing sin for somebody, but ceremonially unclean. You touched a dead body, you touched a carcass, and you're going to be unclean until the evening time. And then it would start over. Why would evening time be the time where you have to, you're bathed and all that, and you're clean from after evening time? That's how the Hebrews told time, wasn't it? That began a new day after sunset. And so we find that's why in Acts 20, Paul's preaching to midnight. He didn't start 9 a.m., but they began on the first day of the week, very early on the first day of the week. And they were then, after midnight, still on the first day of the week because of Jewish time. That helps us understand, there was morning and there was evening one day. That's the way the Hebrews looked at time from the very beginning. But they would be clean then. So that priest could defile himself for his immediate family member. But what about the high priest? Turn with me now in verse 10. He that is the high priest among his brethren, upon whose head the anointing oil is poured, and that is consecrated to put on the garments, shall not let the hair of his head go loose, or rend his clothes, neither shall he go into any dead body, nor defile himself for his father or his mother. Neither shall he go out of the sanctuary, nor profane the sanctuary. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the high priest, not all the time, he could never leave the sanctuary. That was where he always had to be. That's not so. It's when he was serving, offering the sacrifices, that day of atonement, when he was involved, doing the sacrifice in the sanctuary. Even if his mother died, he's not going to until his work has been done. That was the high priest, not the priest that were involved in serving. So there was a distinction there. Really, the rule was, no, you're not going to defile yourself as a head of a family, and you're not doing that even for the high priest would be further close to the kin. You couldn't do that. So we had to qualify that. The serving high priest, he could not do that for his immediate family while he's serving as high priest. Anointing oil is still upon him. He puts on those garments. That was for the high priest. And it was a higher standard than the other priests, but the other priests could do that for the immediate family members. So there was distinction made. If you don't understand the distinction, then we might foul up. And whose fault is it? It's not God's. He laid the law down. But we don't want to be lazy when we think. So could a priest and a serving high priest go on the tent for immediate family member? Yes and no. Yes, for the priests that are not. It's not who's not the serving high priest at that time. The high priest, no, not even on that occasion. Ezekiel is a priest in Ezekiel 24, and people marveled at the fact that when God took away his wife, she died. And it was symbolizing what indeed it was going through. They marveled that he did not mourn for his wife. Well, that's a kin. That wouldn't be his wife anyway. No, they mourn because that's usually it would include the wife. She's very, very close. But he did not do that. He did not mourn for his wife as the others did. We talk about balding, cutting the hair and cutting the head. That's what the pagans did in the land in which the people of Israel were going into. They were a distinguished people. They were set apart from a world around them. And that's why some of these laws are given about mourning for the dead. They will come bring you food because you're mourning for the dead. You don't eat that food. You're not going to be like they are. And so we're not going to be involved in making baldness upon their head in verse 5. Neither shall they shave off the corner of their beard, nor make any cuttings of the flesh. They shall be holy unto their God, and not profane the name of their God, for the offerings of Jehovah made by fire, and the bread of their God. And this is one of those things, well, what's the distinction between the offerings made by fire and the bread of their God? And I hopefully saw the bread of their God was the fat. It was the fat from that wide tail of a lamb that was always offered unto God. And we see in the days of the sinful high priest and Samuel, the man that says, well, high priest, you're not supposed to be eating that meat yet. You're supposed to offer the fat unto God first. Then we eat. And so I'll do it the way I want to do it. And of course, God would put them to death as well. But that's the food for God. That's food for God, the fat. And there again is something that was looked upon as being extraordinarily important and of substance that they were offering unto their God, and that would go to God first. And they were not to partake of that. Yet, if they would partake of other portions of that same sacrifice, because why? They're connected with the Thanksgiving sacrifice, they're connected with the peace offerings, all that fellowship concept is there. And it's something that we kind of invest ourselves in understanding from their standpoint, and you begin to realize he's made every point, every phrase is something that they would understand. And I hope that we're gaining that understanding as well. So question 2, the serving high priest never. Priest, they could do that sometime. Whom could a priest marry? We began to look at what verse 7 says. Who you're not going to marry. Who's not going to be your wife if you're a priest. Well, let's read this together. You shall not take a woman that is a harlot or profane. Now, in this same context, we're going to see a harlot is definitely profane. That's a profane woman. But sometimes a fallen woman, and is there now. We sometimes think about, well, they were put to death if they committed fornication or adultery. Had to be witnesses. We see Jesus on occasion when there weren't witnesses. That was part of the law. But a fallen woman, we've already seen where if a woman who was a slave girl and she was betrothed to another man and a man would commit adultery with her, neither one of them would be put to death. Neither one of them. Because she did not have control of her affairs. This is the only thing I can see, that she was a bondservant, belonged to someone else. But the fellow that committed that with her, he wasn't put to death. They were punished. They were punished, but they were not put to death, like in most cases they'd be. But profane can definitely be, in this context, an emphasis of being a harlot. But it also could be just someone as fallen in disrepute that did not have the death penalty applied to them. Neither shall they take a woman that's what? Divorced, put away from her husband. For he is holy unto his God. This is the quality of the man who's serving as offering these sacrifices. Thou shalt sanctify him therefore, for he offered the bread of thy God. He shall be holy unto thee, for I, Jehovah, he that sanctify you, am holy. And so then we pick up in verse 14, he shall take a wife of her virginity. This is the high priest. This is the high priest that we're talking about here. And the next question, whom could the high priest marry? Well, it's not going to be a widow or one divorced or a profane woman, a harlot. These shall not take, but a virgin of his own people shall he take to what? Shall he take to wife? Be a virgin of his own people. And that was indeed for the high priest. So there was the quality of character that was involved in whom the priest, and especially the high priest, could marry. Now, we just read over this, but we're coming back at it. Can the character of children be a reflection upon the father. It can be a reflection upon the priest that's going to be hurting his service before God. Does God consider that a possibility in our text? Well, let's read this together. Verse 9, and the daughter of any priest, if she profane herself by playing the what? We definitely know what that, by playing the harlot, she profaneth her father. And what's going to be her punishment? Burn with fire. We noticed last week when the Jews did that, they would stone them to death and they would burn their bodies. There was the burning that took place with some of those sins. A lot of times connected with covetousness, and here the sexual sin of turning herself over to be a harlot. Those were, we talked about if a man did that, why would a man do that to his daughter, turn her into a harlot? It's money. And that was spoke higher, more than that her being the character of a woman she needs to be. And that would be a possibility. And God laid the legislation down of how that was not going to be the case, and then how it would hurt the service of the high priest. Now, elders are not our high priest. Who is our high priest now? It's Jesus Christ. We all are priests. We all offer spiritual sacrifices. But we find that for our elders, do they have special requirements of character and home life and their life as a prerequisite of saying they're qualified to serve as a leader of the souls of men? Certainly do, don't we? And the wife is she going to be in subjection to her husband and so forth. But there again, it showed, is he leading his home in the way that's pleasing unto God? Do we see the children of prospective elders? Do we see them as being something that can disqualify a man for serving as an elder? Yeah, they have to have believing children. Our discussion now, was that a Christian or just faithful to their dad? And I believe it's a Christian. Ephesians has been written to the faithful. That's the same word as believing children. That's the description of a Christian. And there's a sense of they are believers, and that showed the influence of the Father upon them. But they were not to be reported of being unruly, of riot, giving in to their sexual desires and being having riotous living, profligate life. That hurts the influence that one might have. And so that principle has been seen, but especially with the priesthood as well. And apparently the problem was sometimes money was causing them to turn over to that. And that was sad. But he's preparing them for that. Could a man with a crippling arthritis offer services on the altar? Now I put arthritis in there. The Bible needs to be applied. And I'm just asking you, I got arthritis. And I think about my grandmother, great-grandmother. She had it bad. Bedridden the rest of her life. And so if I had that, could I serve on the altar of the priest? I see his head's going this way. And he said, well, it'd be cruel not to let that man serve. Well, cruel. Whatever you think, it's just what God says. So we said, well, let's just see what he has to say about that. Verses 16 beginning, speaking to Aaron, said, whosoever he be of thy seed, throughout their generations that hath a blemish, let him not approach or offer the bread of his God. You're going to offer the sacrifices or burning the fat on the altar. For whatsoever man he be that hath a blemish, he shall not approach. And he says he's a blind man, or he's lame. Now this American Standard, your version will say maybe more up to date, and that'll be helpful to the class for you to let us know. Or he that hath a flat nose. Slit nose is the concept, the idea, maybe a gap there being a damaged nose. Or anything superfluous, There's my six-finger great-grandmother. Or a man that is broken-footed, broken-handed. Instead of being crook-backed, what does your Bible say? Hunchback. We identify with that. We've seen that. Or a dwarf, wasting away. It could be real thin, very small. Or he that hath a blemish in his eye, or is scurvy. What might be your translation there? We're talking about a skin issue, aren't we? Maybe eczema would fit there. And the Hebrew term is exactly that. It's where we get it. We see that. There's a rash. It's an itchy rash. It's a skin issue. And he says, are scabbed. Here's something that, on the skin, that it can be something that is wet, dry, but it kind of, it scabs over all the time. Or has his stones broken. He's castrated. And you look at how they would do that on those occasions, especially with their animals. They would do that. They either crush those, or they would twist them off, or they would cut them. Both of them are extremely painful to me. That's the part that their stones, their testicles have been damaged. They're not going to serve on the altar of God. And so I think crippling arthritis, not only for function, might be a difficult thing for him to do that service, but from the standpoint of having that maimed type of thing, not necessarily his fault. But the point is that would be something that God would not allow. You're not going to burn approach the altar and have those deformities or those superfluous appendages that we have. I'd be having 6 fingers and 6 toes on our bodies. Those are the things that he sets forth there, that you're not going to be offering that kind of sacrifice. So I think arthritis would probably rule one out and probably say, I don't want to do it anyway. It hurts. But can I eat of the sacrifices that are being you're So could a handicapped or deformed priest, are they completely banished from the office of the priest? Are they completely banished and you're no longer a priest? You're deformed. It's not that. They could partake of the food that the priests were to eat. They weren't going to be offering it. And there again, this quality of service, not only in the sacrifice that's for only the best to God, but the one who's offering on your behalf has no blemishes either. And that's the point that we're looking at. Verse 22, you'll see, he shall eat the bread of his God, both of the most holy and of the holy. But he's just not to offer it. Only he shall not go into the veil or come nigh unto the altar, because he hath a blemish, that he profane not my sanctuaries. Why? Because I'm Jehovah. I set you apart. I sanctify them. So Moses spake unto Aaron and his sons and all the children of Israel. The quality of their bodies and the who they're going to marry, and all of those things were involved in this particular chapter. All right? Question number 8. What penalty was assessed to a priest who ate of the holy sacrifices while he was unclean? Well, notice we pick up in chapter 22, and we'll just go. Look at verse 4. What man soever the seed of Aaron is a leper, or hath an issue, something that's flowing from his body, he shall not eat of the holy things until he be clean. Whoso toucheth anything that is unclean, be the dead, or a man whose seed goeth from him, that's issuing from his body, his seed. Or whosoever toucheth any creeping thing, be unclean. Verse 6, the soul that toucheth any thing. I'm just going over those because we've been through it. We've been studying what animals were clean, what animals, dead bodies and carcasses and so forth. Verse 7, and when the sun is gone down, he shall be clean. I'm thinking we've got a new day started. Not the way we look at it, the way God's people did at that time. He shall be clean, and afterward he shall eat of the holy things, because it is his bread. It is for the holy things, and that's a phrase. We sometimes, it's holy, only God can partake of that. Reality was, it's devoted completely to God and his sanctuary, and that's where my priest, that's what they eat on. That's their bread. That's what we see here. And sometimes we don't think about it. It is most holy unto God. Oh, nobody was to touch that. No, the priests were. They were to eat of it, because it was God's sanctuary and the provisions for his sanctuary. This was most holy unto God. And a portion of that would be eaten by the priest. So one who had a deformity, he still could serve, but he wasn't coming in that veil, especially as a high priest. But he wasn't going to offer those sacrifices. But he could still be of service, and he's still a priest. And it wasn't looking down upon them because they're handicapped and have disabilities. But it's the quality that God set forth, that we're not going to be any blemishes upon them. So what is the penalty for all of that? Verse 9 says, verse 8, that which dieth of itself or is torn of beast, he shall not eat to defile himself therewith. We've talked about that before. They shall therefore keep my charge, lest they do what? Lest they bear sin for it and die therein, if they profane it. I am Jehovah who sanctifieth them. So they bear their sin, and what's the penalty? It's death. That's serious. To set forth the point about that. So I care about the quality of that, and you're not going to be eating things that are unclean and touching things that are unclean and then offer sacrifices unto me. And the death penalty was indeed there. Any questions? All right, let's look at question number 9. What are some examples of physical defilement pertaining to the priest? What are we looking at? And we pick up at verse 4. Whosoever is a seed is a leper, and so forth, or hath an issue, and it's talk about the seed coming from him. Those were indeed impurities. We drop down to chapter 22 and verse 22 or verse 21, when he speaks of the oblations. We'll see making those vows. But we discussed, so what we talked about a leper. We talked about that was a leprosy, and that might continue on for a long time. And until then, you're not going to be serving as that. But I think we talked about the skin issues. All of those things are set forth there. That any questions you might have about that? Why that's not being cruel of those things that are there. But you see, verse 4, whatsoever man is the seed of Aaron is a leper or hath an issue. Those were something that had to come up, and he dealt with them again in this second go around. Chapter 21. Now we've got chapter 22. It's not redundant. It's things that might come up that indeed he needed to address. All right, question number 10. What was the priest to do if he were unclean before he could partake of the holy sacrifices? What was he to be doing? Bathe and clean himself with water, and that was to take that. They were to take that place unless he bathed his flesh in water. Chapter 22 and verse 6. He's going to be unclean. So it's ceremonial in its nature. That's God's law, and I think he's training the Jew about cleanliness. We're studying Hebrews at the same time on a Sunday morning right now, and we have the ashes of a heifer, and to be cleansed. Well, that wasn't shedding. I mean, that wasn't sprinkling blood. It was ashes of a heifer burnt outside the city, and they would put the ashes in water, and that was purifying them. That's why the Hebrew writer said almost everything was cleansed by the shedding of blood, almost everything. But there was a ceremonial cleanness of being considered you're unclean. And if you are offering unclean animals, if you are unclean in offering that, then you are defiling my sanctuary, you're defiling the sacrifice unto a holy God. And they were training them about the cleanliness. And it's not a big thing to realize that, well, why did he pick water for baptism? Why is there a washing that's take place? We're cleansed from our sins, and it's through the shedding of blood that we've allowed that. But he said, your bathing is not, in baptism, is not putting off the filth of flesh. And the blood, the ashes of a heifer could not cleanse the conscience. It took the blood of Christ to cleanse the conscience. And in baptism, what happens? We're cleansed. We have an answer of a good conscience. I have an appeal for, I want a good conscience. I don't want to be guilty any longer. And that's what we have through the blood of Christ. Well, so that was the bathing to be done. Then he could partake of it. It was fine. Why would a bought slave be allowed to eat of the priest's portion when a hired servant was not allowed to? Now we got to make some distinctions, and we understand the basis of that. So, how did you answer that? Let's read the text, and I think we'll get it. There shall no stranger eat of the holy thing. A sojourner of the priest. Well, this belongs to the priest and his household. Well, a sojourner of the priest or a hired servant shall not eat of the holy thing, but if a priest buy any soul, he's got a slave. The purchase of his money, he shall eat of it, and such as are born in his house, they shall eat of his bread. Tell me the distinction that God is making, that he wants us to see. A hired servant, those are my household. Well, they're working for a wage. They may be working off a debt, and they're a hired servant. But here was a slave bought. They're now, in a distinctive way, of his household. In that particular way. Now, is that commending slavery? Is that condemning slavery? It's just telling you like it is of their time. They would buy the soul, and that belonged to them. Their children then would be part of that household because they are totally being taken care of by them. They're not just hired and they go home, or they hired and they do work for them, and that's no, they belong to me. And there was that distinction there without saying anything about slavery for God. We see other things that might come about that. But there was a distinction, just like a priest and a high priest. They had distinctive things, and they had to pay attention to those things. Question 12, what kind of sacrifice must a man offer if he eats of holy things in error? Question number 12, what was to take place? And I hope we can remember these. He'd take an offering, trespass offering, automatically add a fifth to it. He's done wrong, and he was to add 20% to what the value of that sacrifice would be, and that goes to the priest. That goes to the coffers. That goes to the sanctuary of helping the priest and sustaining them. So they were to offer that type of sacrifice, and we've studied those. That we looked at the difference from a vow and free will offering, but a trespass offering was usually connected with I've wronged somebody, and here the priest. I was eating. Man offers eats of the holy things in error. That belonged to the priest, and I took a portion of that off that altar. Well, that belonged to the priest. You wronged him. 20% more of the value. You'd pay for that, and that was just being equitable to what they were dealing with. Question 13, after being married, the daughter of a priest could never eat of the priest's portion of the sacrifice. Is that true or false? She could never eat again because she's married. She belonged to somebody else. What does verse 13 say? But if a priest's daughter be a widow, so she was married, what's happened? Her husband's died. Or divorced. She's been sent away and have no child, and be returned unto her father's house as in her youth, she shall eat of her father's bread. What's the point? There's nobody to take care of her. She doesn't have a child. She's put away from a husband. He's not there to take care of her. We're not talking about, well, divorce is right or wrong. It has nothing to do with it. It's a fact. She doesn't have anyone. She's returned to her house as what? She'll always be his daughter, but like her youth. Who's taking care of her now? The priest. These are my immediate responsibilities, like my slave. And I'm not equating her to that, but there's the point. There's the distinction. Distinction from a hired servant or a sojourner. It was the part that this is my responsibility, this is how I'm taking care of her. She's going to partake of but she's divorced. Yeah, she is. She's widowed. She's a widow, yes. And there is no children for them to take care of her either. So it's like being return home like she was in her youth, and he makes that point. What physical characteristics of the sacrificial animal were demanded before one could offer it? Our question number 14. So we looked at the quality of the priest. Now look what we see here in verse 21. Blind, or broken, or maimed, or having a wind. Sometimes whether this was maybe kind of an ulcer type issue, maybe in the eye. Scurvy, there's the eczema deal, there's the issue of the skin. Scabbed, it's bleeding, not bleeding, it's a scabbed over. Ye shall not offer these unto Jehovah, nor make an offering by fire of them upon the altar to Jehovah. Either a bullock or a lamb that hath anything superfluous or lacking in his parts, that mayest thou offer for a free will offering, but for a vow it shall not be accepted. So we look at these same things about without blemish. Could you offer a two-headed bullock for a free will offering? Yes or no? You could. It says so. That was your free will. What are we talking about? I'm offering to God. We got to offer just the best to God. And two-headed bullock. That could happen. You've got to be sinful to do that. I don't think so. Not when I read my Bible. That's superfluous. She had more than what one had. And of course, I'm just using that as an example. I'm trying to apply it, but I'm trying to apply the principle. But see, that was something I didn't have to offer. That was something, so well, you could have offered something else, and most of the time I would. But here was one that came, and here's one that you could offer that as a free will offering. So there was occasions where that idea, well, you only offer the best in your free will offerings. Well, this was even more than what we had. That's deformity to you. But God would accept that. But not vow is something required. Not as a sin offering. That's something that's demanded of you, not free will worship unto God. And this is how they could take care of their beast and so forth. But free will, thanksgiving, offering, that they could do that. And that's question 15. Question 16. Give two reasons why the people of Israel should reverence Jehovah. What do we see at the end of chapter 22? You shall not profane my holy name, but I will be hallowed among the children of Israel. I am Jehovah, who halloweth you, or sanctify you, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am Jehovah. I am the Lord. And so what we see here, he's the one that sanctifies us. He's the one that led us out of the land of Egypt. I'm your God. I am Jehovah. And again, because this is a characteristic of his holiness, setting us apart, he's giving some specific laws in which the priests were to honor and to teach the children of Israel about those things as well. Any questions our time is up tonight, but we'll start into lesson number 11. This will be chapters 23 through 25. And we're going to be dealing with the the holy days, the seasons, and the different ceremonies that were involved in the feast days. Might be more familiar to us. Any questions or comments you might have for tonight? Okay, thank you for being here and participating.